States, for example, people renew their driver's licenses, they get passports, they pay their taxes sometimes on the web, they can pay bills, they can do a variety of service activities, and this is growing. Studies in the United States have suggested that these services are very well received and appreciated by the citizens. But there is also a parallel growth going on in the area of public policy information, and that there are indications that people are now using the web not only to renew their driver's license, but to get information about the politics of the country, about the policy issues, and about the candidates. A recent study by the Pew Foundation indicated that 23 million Americans have used the web to comment on public policy choices, and another 14 million of them have used the web to determine how to vote. These are rather extraordinary numbers. We also know that citizens are increasingly using email to talk to their representatives. The representatives and senators in the United States receive thousands of emails every week. Members themselves have begun to communicate with citizens through their own web pages. So we're starting to see the growth of what some have termed the participatory or the participative web, in which people are adding to web content on their own, expressing their own points of view, and increasingly they expect to use the web to talk to their government and to their members. The challenge that we face, those of us in parliaments, is when people turn to the legislative systems to get this information, what are they finding? What is the quality of the information that we make available to them? A study in the United States conducted in the year 2002 indicated that the quality at that time of most member sites was very poor. They were not providing the information that the citizens were looking for. There is some evidence that the member sites in the United States, in a follow-up study in 2004, have improved. That's good news. But there has not been a study of the sites of the Parliament itself, or in our case, the Congress itself, which is what I wanted to do. And in addition, to ask what standards we should use to judge those sites and that information. Now, we all know that legislative information systems have special problems. Members of Congress work with complex documents. They have complex procedures that they themselves sometimes have difficulty understanding. These systems can be difficult to search. They can be difficult to interpret. There are many people who have a say in what the website should look like, and users have different levels of knowledge. Nevertheless, we are still challenged to provide our members and the public with the best information possible. Our answer to date has most often been transparency, by which we mean, as Speaker Gingrich said in 1994, he was going to provide the documents of the Congress to the public as soon as they were available. Put those documents up, and it was his belief that only good things would happen. Today, 11 or 12 years later, I suggest that transparency by itself is no longer sufficient. It is necessary, but is no longer sufficient, and that we have to move to new standards. An underlying premise, therefore, for my research is that in order to go beyond transparency, we have to identify specific, measurable standards that we can use to assess the quality of our systems, because the bar has been raised and they must meet additional criteria. I would suggest first the criteria of accuracy. We assume when we look at the web that the documents we are seeing are accurate. who would put up an incorrect document. My research found that there are times when an incorrect document is put up, and in fact, I can show you this afternoon the fact that the incorrect document is still there. What mechanisms have we instituted for correcting errors? Do we simply put the documents up and then wait for somebody to tell us that there's something wrong? Or do we have a system that finds those errors in advance? What are our standards and procedures for ensuring accuracy? Timeliness is the second criteria I propose. How soon do we make things available? In the United States, I can say that for most of the documents that Speaker Gingrich wanted to have available at the same time, that is the bills, the floor proceedings, and the votes, they are in fact available virtually as soon as the members themselves can see it. But in other areas in the United States, we're not doing as well. Committee documents, while there are many more than there ever used to be, are not made available as timely as other documents in the system. Completeness. This is not just a matter of, is the entire document there? Of course, most of the time the entire document is there. Rather, it is this question that I pose. For a specific legislative action, are all of the important documents available, and are all of the actions recorded in one place so that the user can find them easily? My research, as you'll see, suggests that we have much to do in this area. Fourth, clarity. What steps do we take to make the document understandable to the user? In this case, and I mean whether it's a member of the Parliament or the public. Some may ask, why should we? Others will ask, is it possible? I suggest that we must at least try for our members as well as for the public. And finally, do we provide context? Do we provide any explanatory information about the problem the bill is trying to solve? What are the pros and cons? What stage is this bill at? What comes next? What happened before? What will happen, what is likely to happen in the future? Although I must say, if we have a system that will tell us that, we can all retire easily. These criteria apply whether we're talking, as I said, about public users or members themselves or the staff, whether we're talking about expert users or first-time users. And my study asks, how close are we coming? At the end of my presentation, I will welcome whatever questions you may have, but I would also like to ask you some questions to be thinking about as I relate my findings. Are these standards useful for evaluating the systems that are used here in the Cámara de Diputados? How could these standards be modified or more useful and be made more useful and more informative? What metrics can we use to actually measure them? At this point, as you will hear, I'm just doing a qualitative analysis. But we need to be able to count things more precisely, make them more reliable and more valid. And finally, I would ask you to think about how the systems you use here in the Cámara de Diputados compare against some of these standards, and what are the best practices that you have here that should be included in a future study of this type. I've had the privilege of being here before, so I know you're doing some things very well, and I think those would be an interesting area to discuss. I'm sorry. Briefly about the methodology, how did I go about doing my work? I went to Brussels. I was there for 5 months in the winter. So I attended as many meetings of the Parliament and the committees as possible. I was what they refer to sometimes as a participant observer. I went to committee meetings, I listened to plenary sessions, I followed the documents, I checked to see what was happening, I looked at the documents to see if it reflected those changes, how quickly that was happening, And I didn't do this over 2 or 3 days. You have to do this over a long enough period of time to see whether those changes are being made consistent